A wife left her disabled husband. When he entered the courtroom, all present were dumbfounded with horror. From the window of the ward, there was a bright blue sky. In contrast to how Andrew felt, the sky seemed unreal and ripped away as if from another reality. His life had been chaotic lately. Sadness, melancholy, and hopelessness were his constant companions. Rage mixed with absolute apathy, and it was becoming more and more difficult for him to fight it. Andrew's life shattered the day their fire station received that unfortunate call. It was his shift. Quickly putting on his fire-resistant suit, Andrew rushed as part of the whole crew to extinguish the fire. On the spot, it turned out that there was a lonely elderly man in the old house, so, ignoring the protests and prohibitions of the crew chief, Andrew rushed into the flames. The victim was rescued, but Andrew, trapped inside by the collapsing roof boards, remained inside. From the moment the structure collapsed, he remembered nothing at all, only a bright flash and a sharp pain piercing all over his body. A little later, the man woke up in the ward and began to question the nurse. Andrew tried to stand up, but immediately felt a sharp pain. The nurse told him that his spine was fractured and he shouldn't stand up. The man squeezed his eyes shut tightly, started rubbing his thighs without thoughtfulness, and suddenly realized with horror that he couldn't feel anything. In response to the patient's dazed look, the nurse tried to reassure him and told him that it was only temporary. The man howled longingly. He thought it was the end. His wife, Kate, having visited her husband several times, began to look for reasons to stay at home. A lot of work or other business. But her chilled look didn't escape her attentive spouse. His dearly loved wife was unprepared for the situation, and she didn't believe that sooner or later he would get back on his feet. One day, an unexpected visitor came into the victim's room. It was Sophie, an old friend of Kate's, who came to check on her friend. She was nearsighted, and her thick glasses hid sympathy and fear. Sophie told him that Kate had kicked his beloved Labrador out into the street, and that she herself had left the house with her belongings. Andrew squeezed his eyes shut. He certainly understood that everything was going to happen, but somewhere deep down inside, he had hoped that his beloved spouse would give him at least some time. But now empty hopes had finally burst like a balloon. Sophie, on the other hand, began to visit Andrew more and more often. It was she who became his ray of light in the dark and gloomy realm, bringing with her books from the library where she worked, and then, with her melodious voice, she immersed Andrew in a very different reality, making him forget about his problems for a while. A month and a half later, Andrew returned home, driving in a wheelchair into an empty flat. He finally realized that everything there was a reminder of his former life, which could now be completely erased from his memory. But he couldn't do so. One day, when his mother left the room, Andrew took a desperate step. With a quick movement, he grabbed a packet of strong painkillers from the bedside table and shoved it into his pocket. "What are you up to?" A thunderous voice came from his mother. Andrew went pale. There was nothing to explain. Everything was clear. "Don't even think about it, son. I've already lost your father. I can't go through this again." Andrew lowered his head ashamed, wrapping his arms around his face, and sobbed. "Come on, you're strong. You have to be strong. I believe you will get back on your feet, and you better believe too." Suddenly loud and clear, his mother said. The man shuddered and then turned his head toward the window and thought seriously about something. Sophie's visits had become more and more frequent, and though Andrew had never admitted it to himself, her presence filled him with a genuine childish joy. Slowly, he began to notice something in the modest girl that had previously been obscured by Kate's efflorescence. A sincerity of good-naturedness and a marvelous inner beauty. And one day, when the girl was engrossed in reading, a tight elastic band fell from her hair. The man was dumbfounded when he saw her glossy blonde hair falling down her shoulders. "What's wrong?" Sophie looked up, feeling his scrutiny. Andrew didn't answer. Instead, he pulled down the thick frame of her glasses and looked into her bottomless eyes. "You are my angel," he whispered, mesmerized by the young woman's beauty. Sophie looked away embarrassed, and Andrew, with a sharp movement, sat down in bed and pulled the girl toward him. Later, when the hot and passionate kiss was left behind, she realized what was happening, aghast, because now they realized that for the first time in 2 months, the man was able to sit up on his own. "What a miracle!" Sophie exclaimed, dashing off to call Andrew's mother. His mother suddenly cried when she entered the room. She hugged her son so tightly and was relieved. Since that day, Andrew had developed a great willpower. He persevered, exercising his body more and more. When the man arrived for his appointment, the doctor, looking at the scan, clapped his eyes in amazement. Andrew's bones had healed in record time, which meant that he would soon be able to walk. Encouraged by the good news, Andrew went back to his beloved and told her everything, and she held her close to him. After a month, the man was back on his feet, his sensitivity gradually beginning to return to him. And when Andrew was able to walk 300 feet with confidence, he stealthily slipped out of the house and went to carry out the plan he had long conceived. When he returned, Sophie was frightened and excitedly began to ask where he was. Andrew didn't answer. Instead, taking a red box from his pocket, he looked intently at his girlfriend. "Darling, will you marry me?" Listening to his heartbeat, he asked. Sophie nodded yes. "Yes, of course I do," she repeated. Andrew squeezed her in his arms. "I love you, my angel," he whispered. Genuinely wanting to consummate a marriage as soon as possible, the man called Kate, but she didn't pick up the phone. Sophie gently hugged him by the shoulders and suggested that she meet Kate with herself to talk about the divorce. Andrew, appreciative of the idea, agreed. That same evening, Kate saw her long-forgotten friend on the doorstep and immediately remarked, "I've seen you've gotten prettier. Did you finally find a man?" Looking round at Sophie, she said, "Maybe so. Listen, I'm here on business. Andrew wants to file for divorce." She got to the point. "So that's it. Wait a minute." Kate's face got a look of surprise. "So you two are together now?" "Oh, Sophie, you are such a fool, always picking up the handicapped. Isn't there anyone nicer in the library?" She laughed scornfully. Sophie pressed her lips together. "I don't think that's any of your business, Kate," she replied. Kate falsely put on a smile, and then, waving her friend off like an annoying fly, promised to arrange everything in the best possible way. To meet his ex-wife, Andrew arrived in a wheelchair. He could hardly stand a few pitying and mocking glances. He finally received the cherished document and, getting on his feet, headed for the exit. Behind him, he heard Kate's astonished sigh. His plan had been a success. Now nothing stood in the way of his marriage to Sophie, so they were soon husband and wife. Life began to get better. One day, an excited Sophie approached her husband and told him that she was expecting a baby. Andrew was so happy, he almost fainted. They were hugging each other and laughing. It was the best day of their lives. Exactly 9 months later, feeling contractions coming on, Sophie called the ambulance. As luck would have it, her husband was at work, but confident of his imminent arrival, Sophie began to pack for the maternity hospital. It was uneasy. Every minute the woman felt a kind of inhuman weakness, and by the time she reached the hospital, consciousness had practically left the girl. The doctors were debating whether to operate, as they might lose her. The doctors tried to bring Sophie to her senses. Seconds counted. She screamed as if she realized the baby was in danger. Sophie, gathering her last strength into a fist, started pushing and finally pushed the baby into the light. And when she heard the baby cry, she passed out, as if realizing that the baby would now be all right. At that moment, Andrew, pushing the doctors aside, ran down the hospital corridor. He entered the ward, and seeing his wife's lifeless body on the table, was horrified. The monitor next to him, unconcerned by what was happening, showed the heartbeat slowing down with each passing second. "Sophie, no, no," he shouted, clutching at his wife's weak shoulders. Silence. A straight line crawled painfully slowly across the monitor screen. Bitter tears rolled down Andrew's face. "Please don't leave me. Don't leave me. You are my angel, Sophie. Honey, we need you," he whispered, hugging the already breathless body. A few more painful seconds passed, and then suddenly the unbelievable happened. All of a sudden, the heart machine beeped and hummed. Andrew looked up at the machine with hopeful eyes. "Everyone, hurry up! She's alive!" he shouted, still not believing what was happening. The doctor who entered looked at Kate in amazement. "But how is it possible?" he whispered. "It's a miracle," crossing herself, the elderly midwife answered. and Andrew tenderly embraced his wife, who had regained consciousness. They knew that their whole life was and would be full of magic, but only when they were together. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please give this video a big thumbs up. And also consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell icon to stay connected with us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.